Let's talk about crafting good stories and creating awesome characters. All of the best stories from books and movies and entertainment have the best characters. You can't have one without the other. So let's talk about what make them tick and how you really work on crafting the best for your own stories. So I'd like to focus on what are called character archetypes. Now, these come from the work of Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung and some others who have put these together into a nice little format for us so we can talk about those commonly used archetypes, character types that show up in the best art, the best movies, and the best books. Back to what I said earlier, the best stories have the best characters. Your story is only as strong as your character, and vice versa. So, if I go back to my own history and what I love, of course, to me, the OG Star Wars original trilogy I'm talking about had the best characters and the best storylines around those characters. George Lucas was able to craft a really fun story, but then intertwine the characters in a way that was really compelling and interesting. Good villains, good heroes, good mentors, good damsels in distress, good sidekicks, all the above. The Incredibles is definitely one of my favorite stories, movies, animations of all time. I love the interplay and the way each character was given, their special skill, but then worked together as a family unit, and it was fun and playful, and one of the best Pixar movies. Thanks, Brad Bird. I think the ultimate best story of all time could be argued that it's Lord of the Rings. And the way it was adapted to film in the original trilogy, I don't think it can be improved upon. It is awesome. Every character is displayed with love and care. The Everything from the costumes to the props to the scenes to the sets, everything was given its due, and it all helped to tell the story. And it didn't put aside or hide or undo anything that Tolkien had written. It actually elevated it and put it together in an awesome format. The same can't be said of the things that have followed, but the original trilogy is one of the best. So, the first archetype, the first character we're going to talk about is the hero, the protagonist. They're the central figure of the story. They set out on a journey, they go through challenges. There's something compelling about who they are and what they accomplish. But all along, they doubt themselves. They don't think of themselves as a hero, they don't look at themselves as the hero. They have these weaknesses or challenges to overcome. And those, watching a character suffer is what makes that story interesting. All right? So the hero, the protagonist has to play that part. Of course, in Lord of the Rings, we've got Frodo, the reluctant hero, a small a small character, seemingly insignificant. And I think to me that's what I always loved about Lord of the Rings is that Tolkien focused on that this small, tiny, insignificant person made all the difference in the world, and the entire fate of the universe, fate of Middle Earth, weighed on his shoulders, and he was able to succeed. Pretty compelling. Luke Skywalker had his own farm boy to hero Jedi Knight journey, terrible family heritage, goofy aunt and uncle, whatever you want to say. Luke had a journey, and each movie compelled him to move forward, and he had decisions to make. And against the odds, he succeeded in turning his father back to the good side. Awesome. Great hero, great storyline, great challenges came together for him. The next compelling character we have is a mentor or a guide, that wise teacher that comes in with experience and knowledge at just the right time to help guide that hero along their journey. Of course, we've got Gandalf. The interesting thing about Gandalf, I think, is of course, he played a central and pivotal role in the entire Lord of the Rings series, but he wasn't there protecting, shepherding, and guiding Frodo for the entire story. He had to separate from him, and Frodo was left to himself. Same thing happened in The Hobbit. So Gandalf was always there as this advisor. He encouraged the main characters, but in the end, he was left to himself to do what he needed to do in critical areas. But the main hero, again had to leave the mentor behind and accomplish his goal on his own. The most obvious example is Obi-Wan Kenobi, who at the critical time that Luke needed him, uh, he let himself go, become one with the Force, was struck down by Darth Vader, and became more powerful than he could imagine. And that allowed him to become that mentor and kind of Jiminy Cricket on Luke Skywalker's shoulder to help him at the critical time. The villain or the antagonist is that evil force, that evil individual, that shadowy figure that opposes everything that the hero is trying to do and is trying to destroy everything that they love. Now, it's significant that the hero is only as strong as the villain and vice versa. So if you have a weak villain that really doesn't have an agenda or know what they're doing, your hero has nothing to fight against. Vice versa, if your villain is compelling and your hero is milquetoast, you've got nothing. So those two are connected together and they have to be connected for that story to really be significant. Of course, the biggest, most obvious shadowy figure of all is Sauron himself, the all-watching eye who watched over Middle-earth but missed the actual hero of the show, Frodo, because he was too focused on the wrong thing. His own arrogance, you could say, is his own undoing. The Emperor, the ultimate villain, of course, so obvious in the background, manipulating everything, and then ultimately trying to destroy the universe and control it, only to be undone by the love of a father and a son. The Herald. Now, this individual or this event is what brings, the call to action to the hero. So they play a significant part in the story. This is where someone shows up to say, hey, the world is not what you think. You're meant for more. Gandalf plays that role too. It is possible in a story to apply these attributes to a character or more than one character at a time, or that a character can embody these roles more than one. I'm not saying this right. Anyways, you know what I mean. And then ultimately, it could be an event as well that's a call to action. So for Frodo, it was Gandalf. And then what's fun is to think of in Star Wars, it's R2D2 sharing the message of Princess Leia, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope. That herald and call to action for Luke, where he realizes, hey, the universe is bigger than I think, and I want to do something. I want to be something. The ally or the sidekick, that companion that is loyal to the hero, that provides some comedy relief, maybe, but also helps them find their courage and gives them support where they need it. So, when thinking about Lord of the Rings, Aragorn is the perfect ally, the ultimate ally, who never, ever backed down and followed Frodo to the end. In fact, for Frodo, at that significant moment, yes, that's what he does. He is also a hero in his own right. But ultimately, The Lord of the Rings is about Frodo and Bilbo, and so Aragorn is their ally. Han Solo, the best of all. Can't think of a better swashbuckling hero than Han Solo. Uh, Confident, arrogant, scruffy looking, all of the above, but he was an ally to the end. In Lord of the Rings, in A New Hope, there was that moment of decision where he had to decide, am I gonna, support Luke or take off with the money? Ultimately, he came through, and that's what we like. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons I'm going over these archetypes is in stories, we like what's familiar dressed up in a new way. And so if you skip over these archetypes, if you skip over some of these characters, then your story is unfamiliar. Now, that might be exciting and interesting to think, I'm doing a story that defies all convention. True, but your audience really is looking for something familiar, something that resonates with them. The trickster, the playful disruptor that shows up to kind of upset the apple cart and shake things up a bit. Well, who is that? Who serves that purpose in Lord of the Rings? Gollum. He's an untrustworthy trickster who, all through the story, tries to double cross Frodo for his own selfish ambition. He tries to find ways to get what he wants, but then at the same time, he kind of upsets the storyline by introducing a little bit of unpredictability into Frodo's life. Um, I think it's really compelling that at one point Frodo tells Gandalf, "I wish we could just kill him and be rid of him." Which is true. It's a real emotion because they knew he was untrustworthy and he was leading them to their doom. But Gandalf looked at him and said, don't be too hasty to deal out death because I know or I feel that there's something significant that um, that Gollum is going to do in the story that's going to be important and essential. And we can't just get rid of him. We have to tolerate him for a while to see where this goes. And ultimately, that saved Frodo's life because of how Gollum resolved his addiction to the ring in the end, which helped Frodo win. Yoda. Yoda's a fun character because he's that trickster at one point. He wears the mask of the silly little jungle elf, but then he's also the great mentor and great teacher. But in the beginning, he's fun because he's hiding his identity. The threshold guardian could be an event, but it could also be an individual. It's something that stops the hero on their journey where they feel like, okay, there's no turning back. I don't know if I can do this. I'm going to recommit to my goal. And that's the significance of this part of a story. A literal kind of obvious version of this is the door to Moria, and they're kind of stuck, and they have to decide, are we in or out? And to even further the decision, they've got that monster in the water that compels them to figure out the solution. How do we get in this door? And that's a fun little interplay with Pippin and other things that go on here. And Frodo ultimately figures out, just say the word friend, and we're in. The Sand People and the events surrounding the death of Luke's aunt and uncle is that threshold, that point where Luke decides, I've got nothing. I've got nothing to lose. I need to embrace my future for the good or bad. I don't know if I can succeed. I don't even know what my abilities are, but I'm going to do it anyways. You know, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru are all barbecued on the sidewalk. I guess I got nothing. Shapeshifter. This is a character who can introduce some excitement and interest to the story, a little bit like a trickster. But this could be a good or a bad event. That character is duplicitous. Now, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but it creates tension. Saruman is an ultimate shapeshifter, where he's presented as Saruman the White, the great wizard protecting Middle Earth. But then ultimately we find out his betrayal and how significant that is to Gandalf and what jeopardy that puts the Fellowship in after he makes that decision. So he shifts from one ally or one allegiance to another. Darth Vader himself, being the ultimate villain, he's also a shapeshifter, where Luke has the power to restore him to goodness, and he's able to change his allegiance, and that saves Luke in the end and destroys the Emperor. Wonderful part of that story. The damsel, the innocent, someone that's vulnerable and needs protection, needs help. That inspires the hero, maybe helps him find his courage so that he can ultimately succeed. In these stories, I think it's fun that the damsel, let's think of Erwin here, who we might think of as an innocent, a noble that is under threat by this terrible scourge of these orcs and everyone coming to get her. But she's not helpless. And that's important to notice that she's powerful and strong and plays her part. But she does represent that innocence lost that is worth protecting. Princess Leia represents the same thing. Another really wonderfully crafted character that is not just one dimensional. I need help, I need saving. No, she takes care of herself, but she does represent a high mindedness, a goodness that is worth protecting and preserving in the Old Republic. And so, thankfully, she serves that purpose and carries the story forward. Too bad she's Luke's sister. The everyman. This is us. This is our doorway into the story. And so sometimes we need to have a character that can look at the audience and wink or can say something that represents what we're saying as we recognize, okay, this story, I don't know where this is going. I don't know how to react. Sam really is the ultimate everyman. He is not a hero in the sense that he was not called to action. He's not carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He just wants to live a simple life back in the Shire and tend to his garden. But he's loyal and he helps Frodo and stays with him through the end. But through his eyes, we recognize the gravity of the story. He grounds us into what is at risk. And ultimately, he too plays his part in protecting and helping Frodo, giving us, maybe inspiring us that we too can participate. C3PO is that everyman who's always complaining and questioning the decisions of all the main characters. He presents the voice of reason or the voice of doubt, of worry that makes us question, is this really possible? Is this really happening? But he also provides some comic relief. So these are examples of the important essential characters that you need to introduce into your stories if you're crafting and writing stories. It also explains why when we watch these stories and we see these movies, they resonate with us because ultimately, subconsciously, we are looking for these characters. We want to know that this story has a conclusion that will be satisfying. And when we start recognizing these little elements, it again resonates with us so that we can enjoy it. I'm a big proponent of the happy ending. I love stories that have a happy ending. But what makes the happy ending satisfying is the risk and the jeopardy along the way. If it's not significant, if it isn't meaningful, if it doesn't force our characters to suffer, then the satisfying conclusion is weak. Also, I just don't like um I don't like stories that don't have at least a significant conclusion. I guess I can accept drama and tragedy as a good story, but I don't like it. And I certainly don't like stories that don't serve a purpose. And so to me, crafting that story, inserting those good characters is something familiar and satisfying and makes things worth watching and reading and drawing, whatever you choose. All right, see you around.